I think I got paint in my mouth. Hello everyone, my name is Nathan, and today I'm going to be reviewing Gideon the Ninth. And painting my face is an idea that felt better on paper than it does in real life. So, what is Gideon the Ninth? Gideon the Ninth is a science fiction and fantasy book written by Tamsyn Muir, and it was released in September of 2019. And I'm just getting around to reading it right now. To start off, I would like to talk about my favorite aspect of the book, which is the world building. The author does a great job creating a universe where the core magic system revolves around necromancy and Black Death magic. And I actually think that's a really fun take on a magic system. When necromancy is the core magic, I think it creates some interesting situations for the characters. You know, when that fixation on death permeates every aspect of your culture, it makes it fun to explore how does it interact with their lives. You know, how does it impact their religion? How does it impact their relationships? How does it impact their universe and their day-to-day life? It's such a fun way to explore this kind of classic fantasy magic aspect. And it's set in a universe that feels like it has a rich history. Again, I think the author did a great job with the world building here. It feels like there's lore to be explored. For example, there is this prime necromancer emperor. And that is badass to think that there's this necromancer space emperor who's this mythological figure and he's kind of immortal. And in a way, the story revolves a little bit around him because in this universe, they're fighting some war in outer space against who knows who right now. But this emperor has need of new generals, and they're called lictors. And these lictors are super powerful necromancers. They're basically immortal, and they're super strong and have really strong necromantic powers. They're basically one step below the emperor himself. And this is what kind of drives the plot forward. Because in this universe, there are 9 planets, and each planet has its own political house. And so when the emperor is going to try to raise up new lictors, he basically gathers them all into this haunted space palace where they're going to go through a trial to try to learn to become a lictor. Which brings us to our main characters. And today I would like to talk about 3 characters in this book, maybe 4. The first is our titular character, Gideon the Ninth. And honestly, Gideon is probably my least favorite part of this whole book. I feel like the author had done such a great job building up the background and building up the theme and the lore, and everything is kind of focused on death and gloom and dark, and she uses a lot of visualization that's like bones and tombs and crypts. And so there's this real mood to the story where everything is kind of dark and gloomy. But Gideon has a personality that's like a wisecracker. She is always making these witty quips and these jokes, and she can be described almost like a modern day frat boy. She's really interested in muscles, and she reads comic books, and she's always thinking about hitting on girls and calling girls hot and things like that. Not that there's anything wrong with calling girls hot and liking girls, but her personality feels so out of place in this universe that whenever she makes one of these jokes or these wisecracks, and they're pretty frequent, that it takes me out of the story because it feels so out of place to me. Again, her personality just does not really fit with the story for me. It's a little too over the top in my opinion. But there is a second character in this story called Harrow. And Harrow is the counterpart to Gideon. And I actually love Harrow. She has a personality and a backstory and a persona that seems to fit so much better with this world. You know, she's gloomy and she's a little bit frigid and cold and very serious. And given the nature of this world that revolves around death and necromancy, she's the type of person that I would expect to find in this universe. Her personality fits so much better with what I expect that she feels like such a juxtaposition to Gideon that Gideon feels really out of place. But I love Harrow. I think Harrow Hark has such an interesting backstory and such an interesting character and has great character development and plot development that I'm excited to get to learn more about her. And I wish the story had been focused on her. I wish she was kind of the main character and that we saw the world through her lens, with Gideon being more of a side character. Unfortunately, Gideon is the main character, but she feels a little bit shallow. and she feels a little bit one-dimensional to me, and she fell a little flat in my opinion. Now there is a third character who I've already touched on a little bit, but I want to talk more about, who I think is super interesting, and that is the Emperor. He is the God Emperor of this universe, and he's the prime necromancer. And it feels like he has such an interesting backstory that we're only barely uncovering, that he is what I'm super interested in learning more about. He's kind of this mythological figure that we only hear about in bits and pieces. And that comes back to this world building aspect where he seems really interesting. And even though he's kind of, spoiler alert, he's not really into this book that much, I feel like he was a core character, even though we haven't actually really met him yet. There are also a whole host of side characters in the story that, unfortunately, I feel like didn't get enough character development. When the plot impacts them, I feel like I didn't have enough of an attachment to them to really be affected by that. There was a few who got more development than others. For example, Polymedes is super interesting and a fun character. But there's a whole bunch of others that I feel like I was supposed to have more of an emotional connection to, and I just didn't because their character development was a little bit lacking. Which brings me to the actual writing and the plot and the story. I really enjoyed this book. It was super fun, but the writing at times and the plot at times felt a little bit messy or convoluted. There was some pacing issues, but like I said, overall, it was a really fun read. I was invested in it. I wanted to know more. And I think the strength of the world building really filled in for a lot of the flaws of the writing and perhaps some of the character development. So to rate this book, I'm going to use a scale out of 10 skulls to fit the theme. The first aspect we'll rate it on is the world building and the atmosphere and the setting. And for that, I'm going to rate it 8 out of 10 skulls. Great world building, fun magic, really interesting lore and backstory. For the characters, I'm going to rate this a 6 out of 10 skulls. Again, Gideon for me just didn't really work out. I didn't fall in love with her as a character, even though she was the main protagonist. That being said, I really fell in love with Harrowhark, and if the story had focused on her or more been through her lens, then I would probably rate this a 7 or an 8 out of 10. But because Gideon is the main character and she didn't really do it for me, I'm going to rate it a 6 out of 10 skulls. For the writing, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. Again, there was some pacing issues. The plot was a little bit convoluted at times. Again, I still really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun, but I feel like the writing could be a little bit tighter and a little bit more direct and cleaner. And the personality of Gideon just felt a little too much. Again, it didn't feel like it fit in the world, and it really detracted, I think, from the rest of the book. But the fun factor, I'm going to rate that 8 out of 10. Like I said, I really enjoyed this book. I think the lore was really awesome and it filled in a lot of the gaps. And I was really invested in the story. I wanted to know what was happening. And I especially wanted to know what was happening with Harrow and what her story was and how it was going to resolve. So again, 8 out of 10 skulls for the actual funness of this book. Great world building, great magic system. A few really interesting characters. So, in conclusion, my final rating is a 7 out of 10 skulls. It's a good read. You should read it. It has a few things keeping it from being an amazing book instead of just a fun book. Principally, the character of Gideon. But overall, again, really enjoyed it. Had a great time with it. Go and read it. Especially if you like skulls and gloom and gothic vibes and think necromancy is freaking awesome. If you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, and then go in the comments and tell me what I should read next. I love science fiction, I love fantasy, I'm interested in horror, and I'm looking for some new books to read. So tell me, what would you like to see me read and review next? Now, if you hated this video and you hated my opinion, that's totally fine. I respect that, but please go in the comments and tell me why you disagree with me. I'd love to know your thoughts, Tell me why you think Gideon is the best character ever written. And who knows, maybe you'll change my mind. But if you made it this far, thanks for sticking around. I enjoyed making this video, and I hope we can connect again in the future. So thank you. And if I had an outro video, this is where it would go.